The dressing room smelled like old wood and cigarette smoke. Chuck Berry sat in a metal folding chair, his guitar case leaning against the wall, watching the promoter's hands tremble as he counted the bills. The man's fingers fumbled through the 20s, his forehead gleaming under the single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. Outside, the crowd had already started stomping their feet, and the vibration traveled through the floorboards like a slow heartbeat that refused to wait. The promoter's shirt was stained dark with sweat, his collar unbuttoned, but he still struggled to breathe. Barry's face was stone, expressionless, with only something flickering deep in his eyes. And that moment was when history started getting rewritten. "That's 1,500, the promoter said, his voice tight. Barry didn't move. His eyes stayed on the stack of bills, counting silently, checking every denomination. The promoter shifted his weight from one foot to the other and cleared his throat. The small fan in the corner just pushed hot air around, didn't cool anything, just like it wasn't easing the tension in this room. Barry's fingers traced the edge of the chair, felt the cold metal, the touch of reality. The promoter took another step, close enough to almost beg, and gestured with his hands. Barry's lips moved slightly, but no sound came out. He just waited, because patience was his sharpest weapon. Outside, the distant sound of drums, not a sound check, but the echo of an impatient rhythm. The crowd had come for Johnny B Goode, for Maybelline, for rollover Beethoven. But most of all, they'd come for that moment when Chuck Berry would hit the stage and make the whole world disappear. A bead of sweat ran down the promoter's face to his mustache and hung there like it didn't dare fall. Berry raised his eyes, looked directly at the man for the first time, and when his voice came out, it was ice, flat, solid, final. "I play on stage for $1,500, he said, each word hammered into the air like a nail. The promoter tried to object, opened his mouth, but Barry's hand went up. The conversation was over, but the story was just beginning. The promoter spoke, his voice nearly pleading. "Look, Chuck, you know how it is? The crowd's outside, the musicians are ready, the drummer's been waiting 2 hours, the bassist's getting tense, the piano player's tired. Just get out there and play, okay? We'll work out the rest, I promise." His words hung in the air, slow and heavy like cigarette smoke climbing toward the ceiling. Barry still didn't speak, just took a deep breath through his nose and turned his head slightly, looked at a poster on the wall, an old blues concert flyer, colors faded, corners curled. That poster held a promise, a dream, a lie. Barry had seen too many of those lies, and he had no tolerance for any of them anymore. But this rule hadn't started that night. It was years ago, in Memphis, at a club, when a younger, more hopeful Chuck Berry had taken the stage and poured out his whole heart. His guitar hit those high notes, his feet did the duck walk, and the crowd went wild. When the night ended, Barry's hands were calloused, his back soaked with sweat, and his soul was light. Music was everything. The club owner came over, grinned, and slapped his shoulder. "Hell of a show, Chuck," the man said, fake warmth in his voice. Barry thanked him, closed his guitar case, and waited. The man pulled out an envelope, but inside was half of what he'd promised. "We're a little tight this week," the man said, still grinning, like it was some kind of joke. Barry's face didn't change, but something inside him broke. And that break became the first crack that built the rules. After that night, Barry started writing in a notebook. Just numbers, dates, names. Every city, every club, every promoter, who paid, who didn't, who kept their word, who lied. The notebook filled up, pages got crumpled, edges worn, and a map formed in Barry's mind. Not a map of trust, but a map of risk. In Detroit, a promoter said, "I'll pay you after," and never did. In Chicago, a club owner's check bounced, and Barry had to deal with lawyers for months. In St. Louis, a stage manager said, "You'll get a percentage, you'll get a cut from the door," but manipulated the head count. Numbers changed, figures disappeared, and Barry was left holding nothing but promises. Every memory was a lesson, every lesson was a rule, and the rules started being made of steel. Nobody knew this story, but everybody was going to live with the consequences. Barry turned and looked at his guitar case. Gibson ES-355, its bright red gleaming even in that dim room. That guitar wasn't just an instrument, it was a weapon, a shield, a language. Barry spoke to the world through it, and the world listened, because that guitar told the truth, couldn't play lies, couldn't produce fakeness, but if the world didn't pay, the guitar stayed silent. That was also a truth, maybe the most painful one. The promoter spoke again, this time his voice fragile, almost childlike. "Chuck, please. People are waiting. Don't do this to me. I got a reputation. I got a name in this town." Barry slowly raised his eyes, looked into the promoter's eyes, and that look was like a knife, sharp, cold, not cruel, but absolute. "I'm not doing this to you," Barry said, his voice quieter than a whisper but stronger. "I'm doing this to myself." And that sentence was a manifesto, a declaration, a final word. The promoter pulled more bills from his pocket, tens and fives this time, wrinkled, old, some torn. Barry kept counting, examined each bill, even held one up to the light, checking if it was counterfeit or just sending a message. Nobody could tell. The promoter's breathing got heavier, his chest rose and fell, and the smell of his sweat filled the room. Fear, panic, desperation, all mixed together. Outside, the crowd's voice grew louder, not applause but rebellion now. The waiting limit had been crossed. Someone shouted, "Chuck Berry," and the name got repeated like a chant. "Chuck, Chuck, Chuck." It caught a rhythm, found a tempo, and the crowd moved like one organism. The promoter unbuttoned his collar, gasping like he was drowning, and leaned forward with his hands on the table. Barry was still motionless, just waiting because waiting was his game, and nobody played it better than Barry. The flashback came slow. Kansas City, 1956, wintertime. Barry was about to go on stage, guitar was tuned, mic was ready, amps were tested, but the promoter still hadn't paid. "After the show," the man had said, smiling, like this was normal. Barry didn't play that night. The crowd got angry, some wanted refunds, some yelled at Barry, some called him a traitor. But Barry sat in his room, put his guitar in the case, and waited in silence, read a book, smoked cigarettes, listened to the world. The promoter knocked on the door, begged, threatened, then cried. Actually cried, tears and all. Barry listened but didn't open the door. The night ended, the club emptied, and in the morning the promoter slipped the envelope under the door. Barry took it, counted it, and left. He hadn't played that night, but everybody learned. And the lesson became legend, an urban legend, a rock and roll myth. Now, in this room, the promoter put the last bills on the table, found $50 more from God knows where. Barry reached out, took them, counted, and finally nodded. "Okay," he said, his voice flat. The promoter relaxed, his shoulders dropped, and he took a deep breath. The storm had passed, the crisis was over, the night was saved. But Barry wasn't done yet. "One more thing," Barry said. Same tone, same coldness. The promoter stopped, his face tensing again, muscles tightening back up. "I don't need rehearsal," Barry said, his eyes on the promoter's eyes. "If the musicians want to play with me, they'll keep tempo. If they can't, they don't come on stage. I'm playing once up there. They either follow or they don't." The promoter started to object, but Barry's hand went up again. "And I'm off stage 12 minutes after I start. No more. 12 minutes of music, then I'm done." The promoter's mouth hung open, but no sound came out. Words knotted in his throat. Barry stood up, grabbed his guitar case, and walked to the door. His steps were heavy, each one louder than the sound of the metal chair, and when he stepped into the hallway, the dressing room light framed him from behind. A silhouette, a legend, a rule. The promoter stared after him, still in shock, still not understanding, still couldn't figure out why this man acted this way. But he would understand. Everyone would understand in time, through experience, through pain. If you want Chuck Berry to play, you pay first, then you give him the stage, then you wait for him to leave, and you never complain. Because Chuck Berry wasn't a negotiating table. The backstage hallway was dark, just the dim light from bulbs in the distance. Barry walked, his guitar case bumping his leg, making an arrhythmic sound. Thud, thud, thud. The walls of the corridor smelled damp, paint peeling, and the floor was sticky with remnants of old beer and spilled drinks. No beauty here, no glamour, just work, labor, reality. At the end of the corridor was the door, the stage door, where the light, the sound, the life was. Barry stopped, closed his eyes, and took a deep breath. This was the ritual, the preparation moment, the last barrier between him and the world. The crowd's sound came clearer now. Screams, whistles, stomping feet, all for him, all waiting for that moment, all wanting to see, hear, feel Chuck Berry. Berry opened his eyes and took another step. The door opened, light hit his face, and the world started again. But now on his terms, his tempo, his conditions. The stage lights were blinding. White, yellow, red, all the colors mixed together, and the atmosphere was electric. Berry walked, and with each step the crowd's sound got louder, and applause came like a wave. Slow at first, then faster, then it exploded like a tsunami. "Chuck, Chuck, Chuck!" His name repeated like a hymn, and Berry stopped at the microphone. He took his guitar, strapped it on, and put his fingers on the strings. This touch, this connection, this was the sacred moment. He glanced around. The drummer was ready, eyes on Berry, the bassist waiting for tempo, hands on the strings, the piano player's hands positioned on the keys, ready and willing. Berry closed his eyes, nodded his head slightly, and hit the first note. And the world shut up and listened because Chuck Berry was speaking. The music exploded. Johnny B Goode intro, that iconic riff, that legendary sound. The crowd went crazy, jumped to their feet, bounced, screamed, and Berry did the duck walk in the middle of the stage, knees bent, feet sliding, guitar over his head and the strings playing like they were on fire. The spotlight followed him. His shadow grew giant on the back of the stage, and Berry became for a moment not a man but a myth, rock and roll itself in human form. The drummer kept tempo, the bassist locked into the groove, the piano player filled the chords, and the music worked like a machine, perfect, flawless, synchronized. 12 minutes. Berry wasn't counting, but he knew. Internal clock, perfect tempo, born rhythm, sense. 9 minutes passed. The crowd couldn't get enough, wanted more, hands waving in the air. 10 minutes passed. Berry went into the final chorus, his guitar screaming. 11 minutes passed, the final note approaching, tempo at its peak. 12 minutes passed. Berry played the last note, hit the strings one final time, and the sound echoed, long, trembling, immortal. Then silence, and the silence was more powerful than the music. Berry turned and left the stage. The crowd was stunned. More encore, they shouted, applause like a storm, hands clapping till they hurt. But Berry walked into the corridor. He didn't look back, didn't wave, didn't smile, didn't thank them. Just walked, guitar on his shoulder, his footsteps echoing on the backstage floorboards. Thud, thud, thud. The promoter came running, out of breath, eyes wide as saucers. "Chuck, people want more. Play one more song, just one. 2 minutes, 3 minutes. Berry didn't stop, kept walking. Tempo didn't change. 12 minutes, he said, voice flat, emotionless. That's what we agreed on. The promoter tried to get in front of him, but Berry's look stopped him. That look, colder than ice, harder than steel, more final than a verdict. The promoter stepped back, hands in the air, surrendered. And Berry returned to the dressing room, closed the door, and left the world outside. He closed the door, set down the guitar, and sat in the chair. The room's silence was the exact opposite of the stage's noise, and Berry loved this contrast. Chaos and peace, light and shadow, sound and silence, excitement and stillness. He pulled the bills from his pocket, counted them again, one more time, final check, and put them in his wallet. Everything was in its place. Everything was according to the rules. Outside, the crowd's sound could still be heard, fading, but not completely gone. Echo, impact, memory. Berry leaned his head back, closed his eyes, and for a moment disconnected from the world. His breathing slowed, his heart returned to normal, and his muscles relaxed. This was the moment, the post-show ritual, the transition. But the world would never disconnect from him, because Chuck Berry was more than just a man now. Years later, people would talk about Chuck Berry's rules. Cash up front, no rehearsal, 12 minutes. Some would see him as selfish, some as genius, some as paranoid. Articles would be written in music magazines, questions asked in interviews, analyses done in documentaries. But nobody would know the real story. Those broken moments, that lost money, those lonely nights, those stolen dreams. Berry wouldn't tell them because rules didn't require explanation. Rules just existed, like music, like rock and roll, like life itself. And every promoter, every club owner, every manager would learn. The price of respect for Chuck Berry was paid up front. And that price was never negotiable, never flexible, would never change. Berry opened his eyes, stood up, and picked up his guitar. Another city, another stage, another crowd was waiting. Detroit, Cleveland, Philadelphia, New York. The roads stretched forever, and Berry would walk them all. But the rules wouldn't change, never would. Because the rules were as pure as Chuck Berry's music, as tight as his strings, and as immortal as rock and roll itself. He looked out the window, city lights blinking, cars passing, life going on. And Berry would go on too. And the world would keep listening, because it had no other choice.